Well, thank you for accommodating me. I know I'm probably different from the usual speakers, and this is going to be somewhat of a science-heavy presentation, but I'll try to put a human touch on it. And I want to start by kind of introducing you to my own family's struggles with cancer. Every year, my family used to take a vacation to the Caribbean, ostensibly to escape the Iowa winters. And about a decade ago, we were in Turks and Caicos. And after a long day of getting UV radiation and walking some unnamed beach, we were sitting in the hotel room. So then from the peripheral vision of my eyes, I noticed that my mother's belly had become a little more rounder than what she used to be. And it was fascinating because my mother hardly ate anything because she was a type 2 diabetic and ran 3 miles a day to control blood sugar. In fact, she used to chide me for being fat and out of shape because she would run every morning and I'd try to sneak by the treadmill so that she wouldn't notice me leaving for work without exercising. So I said to her, what's going on? And she said, nothing. And in fact, she kind of was dismissive of the whole incident. And we put it to bed, came back to Iowa, and fast forward about 3 months, we were at a July 4th celebration. And my mother's belly had been completely distended. It looked like she was carrying twins. And the other thing that was there is her ankles were becoming like little twigs. And so I noticed that, all of her weight had essentially shifted into liquids in her stomach, but all her muscle and fat had disappeared. And so we knew there was something, significantly wrong with her. So we went to a gastroenterologist and they said, well, there's nothing wrong with their GI tract. Obviously, there's something different that's incorrect. So then we went to an ovarian specialist and they said, oh yeah, your mom's got ovarian cancer. And that was interesting because my mother was 71 and ovarian cancer usually strikes a much younger demographic of women. And so she was actually scheduled to be operated on a Monday at UOI, and then assembled an ovarian cancer door team. The pathologist called us on Sunday night and said, no, she doesn't have ovarian cancer. We just did a panel on her. She has something different. So if she had been opened up on Monday, she would have probably died on the table because they would have had the wrong surgeons to operate on her.
Oh my gosh.
And so Monday rolls around and we take her to colonoscopy and they finally discover that she has metastatic stage 4 appendiceal cancer. Now, when you go into high school biology or you take a biology class, you learn the appendix is essentially a nondescript organ or a vestigial remnant. Well, it's not. It has immunological function, and unfortunately, it can also form tumors. These tumors are silent and they're deadly. And so my mother fought this disease for 2 years, went through 30 chemo infusions, and eventually passed away 2 years after diagnosis, which is about the time from survival for the stage 4 tumor. The irony behind it is her surgical oncologist got diagnosed with gastric cancer the month my mother passed away. And he died 2 years hence at age 43 of gastric cancer. And he'd been recruited to the hospital for a special town that had in removing pancreatic tumors called the Whipple surgery. But it was obvious that there were better techniques that were necessary to detect cancers early in time, especially what we call silent tumors, cancers of the brain, cancers of the pancreas, cancers of the abdomen. Those that don't manifest symptoms till they're too late, they've spread. And so the title of my talk is called The Utility of Liquid Biopsy by Using Exosomes for Cancer Diagnosis. I just want to thank Sarah and Jay. Jay, obviously, is my brother, and Sarah is my colleague who's now finishing her PhD in public health, who helped me with the early work in this particular field. So you're probably familiar with the modalities of biopsies right now. One is, imaging. So this is actually a brain tumor, and it's pretty obvious what the patient has. And this is the surgical biopsy where you go in, you find a tumor either by ultrasound or you use an MRI or a CT scan, and then you take a piece out and then you do slides on it and see what type of tumor it is. The problem is by the time you detect either this or that, they're spread. There's a bolus of cancer and metastatic cells that are already coursing through your body. And so the rate of curative procedures available to you is actually pretty slim. In glioblastoma, the time from diagnosis, the time of death is 4 to 8 months. Obviously for pancreatic cancer or non-neuroendocrine tumors, it's similar, it's about 8 months. And so there needs to be something better where you can diagnose tumors much earlier in time. And that's kind of reinforced by this slide. And even if you don't take anything else with you, you can see that, for example, in breast cancer, if it's diagnosed at stage 0 or 1, which is a local tumor, you almost have 100% rate of cure. Similar with colon cancer, it's 92%. Unfortunately, if you then say, I'm getting a routine colonoscopy or I'm getting, colposcopy, or now they have Cologuard, that's still not early enough in time for you to get that 92% cure rate. You can see that the stats at stage 4 become dismal. Even with new therapy in lung cancer, it's 1%. For colon cancer, it's 11%, and for breast cancer, it's 22%. That number drops even further if it's inflammatory breast cancer. And so those are some of the mutational variations that we see in tumors. Now, one of the things that people also say is that, I don't like to go to my doctor, I'm not going to go in until I feel like there's something really wrong with me. The problem is that these tumors grow, unchecked without your intervention. And so by the time you actually go to the doctor, it's way too late. And so there's been a new paradigm that's actually been created in science and medicine, and we will experience this going forward in the clinic. And there are multiple companies that are kind of jockeying for this position. One you might be familiar with, which we work with, is called Integrated DNA Technologies, which is a large company in Oracle. They got bought out about 3 years ago for almost $3 billion by a company called Danaher. So the concept of liquid biopsy is simple. In the old days, we would take a piece of your tumor when we could feel it or see it. Similarly with MRI, when we see it using imaging. Here we just take your blood. We take about 5 milliliters of your blood. And through this blood, we can detect all of these different markers and biomarkers that are present, that are coursing through you as we speak. And so we can detect multiple cancers earlier in time, much earlier in time, whether they're stage 0 or stage 1 at the most. So imagine this, you go to a doctor, you have a stage 0 colon tumor, you take Zolada, which is a drug, for a week, and you're done. That's far different than losing your life 2 years later or undergoing an 8-hour high-tech surgery, which has a mortality rate of 50%, and the quality of life, which is diminished because most of these people get colostomy bags or ostomy supplies, and so it takes the time to get you away also. And so the concept of liquid biopsy is actually very simple. You can detect a variety of things in there, but what we're focusing on is one particular facet of the liquid biopsy. And this is in every one of us, and these are these little exosomes. So if you look at a tumor cell, and I know this panel is busy and it's pretty sciencey, but what we should really pay attention to is these tumor cells who release these little vesicles. And these vesicles are released at all times. So if I draw blood from you or me or anybody else, we can get a bunch of these vesicles out very quickly. Once these vesicles are removed, you can interrogate the cargo of the vesicle. And so that vesicle will tell us, hey, I'm benign, I'm just doing my job of transporting a signal from cell 1 to cell 2, or I'm something that is going to form a tumor. I have bad mojo in me, I'm going to carry that to a healthy cell, and I'm going to convert that healthy cell into a tumorigenic cell. So this has really changed the paradigm of how cancers start, because one of the things scientists did not know or understand is, how is a tumor initiated? Is it a genetic mutation? Is it something more than a genetic mutation? Is it environmental damage along with genetic mutation? Or is it something that is carrying the signal around in your body? And it turns out it's a combination of all three, but the blockade can be best executed with these things called exosomes. So this exosome is just like a spherical raft. It's just basically, if you look at it, if you look at your cell, and your cell is a round circle or a sphere, these exosomes are smaller versions of your cell. And they carry a bunch of things. And these bunches of things are bad and good. Like I said, some exosomes are actually for wound healing and for healthy processes of cellular turnover. But others carry some things like tau. Tau, for those who aren't familiar with science, causes Alzheimer's disease. So beta amyloid and tau are the two tangles that form in your brain, which cause dementia and other neurodegenerative diseases. What we're focusing on is something called microRNA, which I'll get to in a second. But essentially, if you can capture the exosome, you can do it rapidly. You can then develop a test which can be executed in a doctor's office within 10 minutes to tell you whether you have a panel of potential cancers that you're going to be getting in the future. And so we're looking at one particular molecule called the microRNA. And so I know that this is kind of science, but the traditional paradigm of science was you have DNA, which is in your chromosomes. That DNA is kept locked, and it's a double helix, so there's two copies, meaning that if one strand is damaged, you can use the other strand to essentially complete that mutation and take it out. So you have RNA, which is the DNA that is transcribed, and then the RNA is made into protein. So it goes DNA to RNA to protein. That's how humans and other higher mammals live. But Mother Nature is never simple. There's always complications involved, and it's the complications that we like to exploit. So there are these small things called mRNA, and those stands for microRNA. And so most mRNAs, messenger RNA, goes for proteins. MicroRNA was thought to be superfluous junk that was essentially garbage material that cells were discarding in these vesicles. Well, that could be further from the truth. They turn out to be the master regulator of cells downstream. So they're tiny little RNAs, but they don't code for any protein, but they're still detectable. They can still be probed. They're still single-stranded. And in this venture, we're being helped by IBT in creating the probes to detect those microRNA. So microRNA essentially turn cells that are normal malignant. So what we've been doing is we've been developing a database for each cancer type of which microRNA are actionable, so that once we find those exosomes, we can quickly look and see whether that signal is returned. And if the presence of the microRNA is available, then we know that that organ is potentially tumorigenic or will become tumorigenic in the future. But one good thing about exosomes is that the exosomes that are collected always originate from their target organs. So exosomes that are released from the pancreas go back to the pancreas. Exosomes that are coming from your liver go back to the liver. So they have an addressability in terms of trafficking. So this is a database that we developed along with IDP and my colleagues, which looked at which microRNAs were available for pancreatic cancer. So with this, we could tell them you had a pancreatic tumor much earlier than you would have any symptoms. So you would have type 2 diabetes, you would have, abdominal pain, pancreatitis, all of which are now stage 3 and stage 4, and limit the surgeon or the oncologist options for curing it. This, on the other hand, would give that individual a chance to live a healthy and normal life and remove that tumor without even being established. The other thing that's also interesting is that if you're looking from an economic perspective, these tests are much simpler, easier to do, and cheaper. So they're more cost effective for insurance companies to build, and they can be done repetitively. So they can be done once every 6 months without much effort. So the one bottleneck of isolating exosomes at this point in time is speed, consistency, and reliability or integrity of exosomes. So all of these methods, which you might not be familiar with, but do exist, are there. But the problem is, if you go for chemotherapy, for example, you have at the most 1 hour labs before you're destined either to get chemo that day or not. And I know this from my mother's example. And each of those chemotherapy labs, believe it or not, costs $10,000 a pop. So, these are not cheap things that are done quickly. And so using these traditional science-based methods, it would take hours and hours. And if you multiply that by the number of patients who, for example, come to Holden, which is about 200 or 300 per day, to get chemo, you're going to have a bottleneck where these are infeasible methodologies. So we work with a company, called IBM to develop a chip that allows you to do this method within 10 minutes with a purity of more than 99%, with the cost effectiveness of the chip of being $5 per chip. And so any scientist or any physician can do this. quickly and easily, and it involves the process called nanofluidics. And I'm not going into nanofluidics, but I'll pass on a couple of examples of microfluidics so you can take a look. Roughly speaking, microfluidics is on the scale of 1 times 10 to the minus 6, so 1 micron meters. So if you're looking at a human hair, that's 10 times smaller than the human hair. We're taking that down to 1,000 times smaller than a micron. And so for that, that would be 1,000 less than the width of the human hair. So these are all exquisitely complicated processes. There are 19 patents that are on the design of the chip itself. And as you can probably imagine, there are very few people who can do it because of the intricacies involved. Obviously, IBM has extensive experience in wafer design, and their side product for making computer chips is the fact that they can do this in the biological world. So what we've done now is that we're taking the liquid biopsy and made it attainable, cheaper, faster, and more reliable. So you can read the math, unless you guys are very like math, but I just want to show you this cartoon in the middle. And these are actual exosomes that are flowing in the stream. There's actual video on this if you go to YouTube. But essentially, you can actually see the blood sample being separated in these exosomes form. So what you can imagine here is, I don't know if you've ever seen Prices Right under the Congo game. The guy drops it from the top, and there's from the bottom. Well, this is kind of a control plinko. We can control the geometry of these pillar post arrays. And so based on the size of the exosomes we wish to isolate, we can use mathematics to design where they should go. And so if they're big blobs, which are not exosomes, they will be retarded by the array and then bounced off. If they're small blobs, which are exosomes, they will just kind of zigzag through and go into the collector, which we want. And so this can be done very quickly. It's been peer reviewed, the papers have been published, and what we're doing right now is developing better probes into these exosomes. I guarantee you will experience this going forward in your clinic sometime in the future. Calvin Jr., he's already working with a company called XORX in Maryland for detection tests for prostate cancer, because it turns out that the PSA antigen, which is traditionally used for males with prostate cancer, is all over the place. So some people who have low PSAs have, metastatic prostate cancer that kills them within 6 months because it spreads to the liver and bone. Other people have high PSAs and tear it alive 5 years later. So there's not much correlative evidence between the PSA and the kind of the virulence of prostate cancer. Similarly, the same thing happens with ovarian cancer. There's a CA125 antigen that you can do for women with ovarian cancer. That also has very low predictability. And then there's CEA1, which is for colon cancer. And my mom's was 0, even though she had tumors seeded all over after the body. So if you're wondering what actual exosomes look like, you can actually see them in the cartoon there, and you can see their size. They're very diminutive. They're 43 to 75 nanometers. So this is not something you can even see with a light microscope. These are imaged from an electron microscope. And so you can see they're very tiny, but they're very powerful. And we have a lot of them. We have about 10 trillion cells, give or take, in our body. And we probably have 10 times the amount of exosomes that are available that are circulating in your bloodstream all the time. So they're carrying signal, they're carrying waste, they're carrying master switches to regulate processes in your body, including steam, digestion, everything. So, in 1982, when they first isolated exosomes, they just thought that it was just the garbage system of developed cells were forming these things and letting them off, and then eventually they were getting destroyed in the liver. It turns out that that's incorrect. That's what they are. So, in terms of where we are, we actually have a go-to-market product. We're not a startup in that sense. The prototypes have been developed, and now it's an issue of scale up. We're now designing specialized chips which can not only isolate exosomes but concentrate them at the same time, so that we can use the body fluids like urine, blood, cerebrospinal or spinal tap fluid. And we're also designing exosomes to carry cargo, so they can then be honed back into the tumor or in your brain to correct the damage that they caused. So essentially, we take them, we strip them off the bad stuff, pop in the good stuff and then retarget them to where they should be.
That is
Because, you know, essentially we're Trojan horsing them to go where they
Yeah.
came from. So, and the good thing about it is they don't go elsewhere because they will go only where they came from. So, you know, these are things that are done, we're going to work with done guys, I think it's at IBM's Thomas Watson Research Center. And, you know, if you ever get a chance to go somewhere fun, you should go and see that place because they have the Jeopardy Watson robot, you know, which you can play against, and they have a quantum computer, which will revolutionize computing. So that's nice. But, you know, I purposely get my talk very light in terms of science. You could go into the minutia much deeper. But, you know, really what the bottom line is that, you know, this should be an awareness of the fact that research is being done here. And, you know, people who are fighting cancer or Alzheimer's disease or many of these other diseases which are intractable right now need better tools, both in terms of diagnosis and in treatment. And I think that if you kind of, you know, put the same wheel and spin it, it's not going to help. I just want to conclude by giving you one concrete example. The two frontline therapies for cancer were developed in 1957. 5-fluorouracil was patented in the 50s. Platinum drugs were patented in the early 60s. You cannot give a patient with a straight face, and if I was an oncologist and say, you know what, I'm going to give you stuff that my grandma took. The standard of care has to improve kidney and screening. It doesn't matter because one of you will get this disease or something related to it. You probably know people who have it. People have lost their battle fighting it. And that clock will continue and churn and churn and churn. And we have to disrupt it any which way we can. So I thank you for your time.
Anybody else like to?
That's my first question. Wow.
That is amazing. So you have a lot of different types of, what about blood cancers, leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma?
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah, they have that central theme.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, this, the different bodily fluids that you can draw and sample. You said you're focusing on one specific type of cancer.
Yeah, it's actually a pan cancer. I just put the pancreas. Yeah, it's this planet.
So it's not conceivable or is it currently possible for me to come into the doctor's office, you know, use the cup in the bathroom and run it through a panel and they can say, Steve, it looks like, you know, you've got type 2 diabetes, but you know, your PSA is fine, but it does look like you could be developing at some point pancreatic cancer.
Yes.
That's what you're different. You've got a Ewing sarcoma growing in your knee, and it's
right.
It's something out.
Yeah, so what we're designing is we're actually designing what they call a microarray, and that would be stamped with the different cancers that we would target all at the same time. So you would offer only one sample,
Right.
and all of those cancers would be screened simultaneously. So if you have, say, cognitive disorders, we would run a new degenerative chip on this and screen all of them at the same time. If you have diabetes, we would screen all metabolic and endocrinology chip. Different families of chips.
Okay.
Yeah, depending on how small we can shrink that footprint, because right now that chip is about 2 inches by 2 inches and has about 1,000 by 1,000 microarray.
What is this that we're looking at right here?
So this is a chip that was the first family of microfluidics. So it's a gold stand chip that can essentially, you can peg your cells on it and we can detect the drug response. So for example, we use that particular chip to look at chemotherapeutic sensitivity to breast cancer cells.
So in using this, you have an idea of what type of cancer you're looking for based on symptomology?
No, we have probes that are affixed to that panel. And so you don't even have to have symptoms. It would just be that the exosome is carrying that load. You will get symptoms later in the continuum.
I guess what I'm not understanding is if you have more than one chip,
Sure.
are those all chips packed together? So depending on which.
Yeah, funny you should ask that. We were trying to design a bigger wafer, which essentially would run a poly panel, not just for cancer, but for other diseases as well. But our first focus has been cancer because most people are, you know, familiar with that disease. It's easier to fundraise.
Okay. I'm going to back up a little.
Sure,
You mentioned that you went to law school.
I did.
Tell us about your patent. I know your long story.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I didn't realize.
But
But this is amazing. But how did you get here? Like, what,
Sure.
what is your,
Well, I mean, I think long-term people actually know that where we were back, I'm a scientist and an attorney, patent attorney by training. But I also used to have a supplements business here, so I know you. And I know a couple of other people from my past life where I used to sell, endurance gels and, supplements for runners. That business failed because we just ran out of marketing cash. And then we decided, what's really my wheelhouse? It's not per se, developing products for people who are already fit. And then my mother started getting really sick. And I decided that I would use my scientific training, and find a group of people who had innovative technology to partner with. So I did my undergraduate work here in microbiology and biochemistry in Iowa, then did my graduate work at Johns Hopkins, then came back to law school. And I've been working actually at a stem cell and cancer company for the last 17 years, still CET, which is run by Alan Moy. We have the largest repository of both what they call adult somatic stem cells and reprogrammed stem cells in the world now. And so we've been making disease models for a long, long time. Since this presentation was picked up, I've actually have more collaborators now that have come on from pediatric neurology and oncology at Iowa, along with the oncology department, Joe Wiener and Ahmed Milham, who's now the chairman, and also some people in India who are geniuses at nanofluidics. So we've developed families of chips, not just for this, but for CA-125 detection, COVID, RSV, and a bunch of other things that are in kind of in the offing. And the sensitivity of those detection methodologies is 1 femtogram. And just to give you an idea what 1 femtogram is that if you looked at a dot of any material, that is 10,000 times more than probably a femtogram. So, we're looking at 1 or 2 molecules that are kind of in your body, and that will give women a much earlier lead in terms of getting either, ovarian curettage or some sort of drug therapy, as opposed to going in, and having high-tech done or having, a hysterectomy along with the quality of life that's garbage.
Yeah.
So we're trying to reduce the load of people who have these type of burdens. And for me, particularly, neuroscience has always been kind of the fascinating thing. And I know friends who have cognitive disorders, and it's really kind of a shame to see how society shuns them. And so we're looking at, early markers for frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, and Alzheimer's, because they do have commonalities and themes, and also drug therapy, because one advantage of exosomes is that they do penetrate the blood-brain barrier. So in glioblastomas, for example, right now, you must open the skull up and stereotactically remove the tumor because there's no other way, because you can't introduce chemotherapy because the molecules are too large, and there's an absolute maximum of 80,000 Daltons, which will block those drugs from going into the brain. So you must make a hole and put either, a shunt or remove it manually, both of which are devastating for patients when they lose eyesight, they lose hearing, whatever, is being compromised. Exosomes, on the other hand, you can just inject them in your bloodstream, and as long as they came from your brain, they will just home through your lymphatic system, through your spinal cord, into your brain and home into the tumor. So, and there's no collateral damage.
It's such a difference from a sports hydration product. Which by the way, did taste very good.
The problem was, you learn from mistakes, and I think that's the one thing entrepreneurship knows, but don't be scared of doing it again, but do it differently.
Yeah.
And
You had one, started a funeral once.
well, I'm sure we were here for that probably. So, but yes.
It was fun. You got some fancy path.
Yeah, and the thing is, raising money in Iowa is always a challenge, comparatively speaking. So
Is that where you're at now?
yeah,
Okay.
we've reached out to some individuals. There are some companies where I work in Kit, like Viewpoint Molecular, which have succeeded, but they all have kind of their own pitfalls. And I'm not going to elaborate on their management style, but there are things that you want to be careful about as to who your partner is. But these are things that require a lot of passion and intensive efforts, because Yeah, it's just the way it is.
So related to raising money, with your existing technologies and your partnerships, are you in clinical trials? Are you doing?
No, we're not in clinical trials, yeah.
Are you looking at doing, preclinical with animals or this? I'm interested.
Yeah,
in
we
the process to continue.
right, so we do plan to do with animals, and the one thing I can also illustrate is that this is perfectly applicable with the veterinary market also. And livestock and all those things, they get the same things, so, and what I also can mention is the sensor is agnostic, meaning that you can just as easily isolate viruses, which animals get, and which are devastating in terms of livestock loss. So you could just as easily tune this chip to isolate COVID as opposed to, they're both round particles, they're both of certain size, and only the geometry needs to be changed. Yeah, so we do that. So,
Question I have
sure,
is usually there's competition when money's involved.
absolutely.
And would you, from the current medical establishment, the way they treat cancer currently, is that swimming upstream?
Yes. Because I think that people have an overestimation of what is in the clinic right now. And that's sad, because I'll just again tie it to appendix cancer. There have been 0 new drugs that have been in the pipeline since my mom passed away in 2014. It's 2022. People talk about immunotherapy all the time. Well, immunotherapy is kind of like a not quite ready for prime time player. And the problem with immunotherapy is that it not only is ineffective in most solid tumors, when it's too effective, it will wipe out the organ that is designed to protect against. Those are pancreatic cancer. And you infuse these natural killer cells that have been genetically modified, which we do actually. That's called gene editing or CRISPR, and I know a few people have heard of that term. And so what happened, for example, Alex Kabak actually had this done to them. And they actually had to withdraw him from the immunotherapy because it was eating his actual pancreatic tissue, not just the tumor. So if you have a bloodborne, cancer like a myeloma or leukemia or lymphoma, those have actually gone further because they use gene-edited T cells to do the job, or gene-edited B cells to essentially commit suicide. So yeah, it's a mixed message. So for solid tumors, the podcast has been pushed far enough. For some lymphomas, it has been effective. But the other thing you probably hear is drugs like Keytruda, which are what they call PD-L1 checkpoint inhibitors. Well, the problem with the checkpoint inhibitors is in some people they work very effectively. So I know a person who was given 3 weeks with lung cancer, and he went on a Keytruda combo, and now it's he's walking faster than I do. But the problem is that notwithstanding any drug therapy you get, these exosomes and their concomitant cancer stem cells are always resident in your body. And until you wipe them out, it'll come back. So it's just looking for an opportune time to return. So, when people say I'm in remission, well, you should enjoy every day you get in remission because you never know when the clock's going to strike 0. So these are the kind of things that we're also looking at with what they call salvage therapy, which is to remove the kind of the detritus that is left that will come back and reform these tumors. And unfortunately, they reform in places that are even worse than where they started. So the lung usually goes to the brain, which is terrible.
So I have a pediatric cancer survivor.
Mhm.
What is the likelihood of this being used on children?
Well, because it's one of the best therapies in terms of no side effects, no pain, easy to infuse, and quick. So I mean, those are all the things that you want for a child. I mean, you don't want them to, chemotherapy is hard. And I think what people don't appreciate is that when people take chemotherapy, it kills the cancer cells, but it's killing their body too. I mean, my mom's fingernails are black because all the tips have essentially disappeared because you get neuropathy, and that doesn't come back. It's irreversible. And so with exosomes, you get no side effects because they're just going to where they came from, and they're carrying the cargo that's essentially devastating to the tumor cell because it's not expecting, where it's coming to it. So.
passenger.
Yeah, yeah. Some of the vending, I'm not from the medical section, but yeah, I feel that there's a very thing about the shit,
Yeah,
because, we're coming, it's a specialization, and here, what I see is that there's a relationship between the part of the whole.
yeah,
And this is great, because, you're trying to, sometimes you're always concentrated on that part, okay, lung cancer, and we're going to the lung
yeah,
specialist. And over here, you're, right, the whole, the body reacts in a certain way.
it does,
Things kind of the way it reacts.
yeah,
Exosomes or other types, I think the body anyways gives signals to the external.
absolutely,
I think
yeah.
it's,
Absolutely, and I think there's always an interplay between, say, cancer or inflammatory disease, autoimmune disease, your immune system, all those are all in concept, so.
but my question is, what's the constraint, the biggest constraint you have right now in development? Because I see it's
Constraint, yeah. There are two, one is money, because it's a very cash intensive shipping and production process, and two is scale. So scale of, COVID kind of screwed that up royally for many people. Just to get, for example, silicon wafers, blank wafers to make chips is a difficult thing. So, yeah, supply chain issues and cost. So more scale up equals cost being driven down. The irony behind that is that the University of Iowa actually does have a microfluidics facility, but the director bailed like 4 years ago, and now it sits idle. Nobody's using it.
So pending financing.
Yeah,
How long before it's market ready, my understanding?
yeah, it is, yeah,
So is it just a matter of having the funds to create the product
yes.
and then educate the providers on how to use it correctly?
Yeah, it's not only the education part is true, but we've actually had interest from vendors who supply what we call research labs or academic labs, because they want to isolate exosomes faster, more reliably, and then they want to do their own testing on it, for example, sequencing, those type of things. So, yeah, so it's just a question of money and scale. Yeah. But there are a lot of technologies which further on the line, so it's not a unique thing that other people don't experience, because IBM itself knows that there are things they've developed that kind of never made it at the same time. So, yeah. But they exist. That's the thing. They do exist, and they will hopefully revolutionize healthcare, because, like I said, people need something better when they get to that stage, because it's always an abstract disease till you have it. Then it's the only thing that pervades your mind. So the people always say, I'm not going to get cancer. Then you get cancer, and you go, I want the best stuff available, and there's nothing there. So,
Yes.
well, thank you. Thank you all. Yeah,
This is really exciting.
thank you.
I'm curious, have you raised any funding yet? Or are you looking
Yeah,
to get
That,
government?
I will do kind of the top layer of advice on it. We partnered with a firm in Cedar Rapids who essentially turned out to be useless. So the answer to the question is no. We put in our own money to make this thing go. But we are going to sever ties with those individuals at the end of this month and move on.
Are you going to pursue trying to get some government grants for this?
Yeah, so we're applying for what they call SBIR and STTR grants, the April finish date, along with a couple of foundational grants from like Alzheimer's Foundation and Michael J. Fox. Yeah, but getting private equity money in this town is pretty difficult, especially now with the economic downturn. You probably know this. We've done this rodeo before, so, and the usual suspects always show up, and so I see them in my buildings. But yeah, we will probably spread the net a little wider by the summer and see whether we can get our stake money.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, just one more question.
Sure.
Curiosity, would you be interested in joining the company? Working with some other big company, which is not in the sector?
Could you repeat that? Would I was we interested in working with another company?
Yeah, with other big companies like that.
Yes, we do.
you do. Are you talking about partnering on it?
Yeah. Other companies.
Yeah, it's funny because, we actually reached out to a few scientific companies that are billion-dollar players like Thermo Scientific. The problem there is that they want a variety of chips for their own internal validation. So it kind of becomes like a chicken and egg problem. They don't want prototypes, they want lot batches, so they want 100 chips, 100 chips, 100 chips. If you're gonna do that, at least in the initial manufacturing runs, it's gonna cost us a significant amount of commitment in terms of time and money. But we've had interest from other big companies to partner, both for sales and for internal development by themselves.
All right, well, I'll ask the final question. What can we as a community do to support you?
Just spread the word, I think that people should realize that, they shouldn't view cancer per se as a death sentence. They should view it as, a chance for hopefully, getting innovative therapy. I think the one thing that the U of I should emphasize or is provide is access to more clinical trials, because the one thing I noticed is that when you look at a number of clinical trials here versus say Mayo Clinic or even Carbone in Wisconsin, it's terrible. I mean, it's beyond terrible. And ultimately, all that does is shortchange this island, because then they have to go to Rochester or they have to go to Madison to get treated, and what's the point of that?
All right, let's give them a round of applause.